In the summer of 1954, a bus rolled into a remote corner of Oklahoma, carrying 11 white boys, all around 11 years old. They came from similar homes, similar religions, similar family structures. None of them knew each other. To them, this was just another summer camp. 3 weeks of swimming, hiking, games, and freedom away from home. What they did not know was that they had stepped into one of the most famous and controversial psychology experiments ever conducted. This experiment would reveal how quickly humans divide into groups, how easily loyalty turns into hostility, and how thin the line really is between cooperation and conflict. It would later be compared to a real-world version of Lord of the Flies. Welcome to the darker corners of social science. The boys arrived at Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma, surrounded by forests, rocky hills, and winding creeks. They were told they would live together, get to know each other, and form a group. The counselors encouraged them to swim, hike, play games, and work as a team. Before long, the boys chose a name for themselves. They became the Eagles. They painted the name onto flags, created their own identity, and began speaking in the language of us and our group. What they did not realize was that across the park, hidden by distance and careful planning, another nearly identical group of boys was doing the exact same thing. Those boys named themselves the Rattlers. Neither group knew the other existed, and neither group knew that their counselors were not ordinary camp staff, but psychologists running a carefully designed experiment on group conflict. To understand why this experiment happened, we need to go back several decades and several continents. Muzafer Sherif was born on July 29, 1906, in what was then the Ottoman Empire. He grew up in the town of Ödemiş, near modern-day Izmir in Turkey. His family was wealthy, and he was one of 5 children. Sherif's early life unfolded during political chaos. He witnessed war, occupation, and the collapse of empires. These experiences shaped his lifelong fascination with how groups form, clash, and define themselves. He earned his first degree in 1926, then completed a master's degree at Istanbul University. Later, he moved to the United States, studying at Harvard, and eventually earning his doctorate from Columbia University in 1935. Sherif was deeply influenced by social psychology and theories about instinct and group behavior. Politically, he became openly anti-fascist and later sympathetic to communist ideas. These views would eventually put him in serious danger. During World War II, Sherif was detained in Turkey for his political beliefs. Fearing harsher punishment, he returned to the United States, where he continued his academic career. In 1945, he married Carolyn Wood, a fellow psychologist and researcher. Together, they would become one of the most influential partnerships in social psychology. By the early 1950s, Sherif was under FBI surveillance due to his political views. At the same time, he was deeply focused on one central question: why do groups turn against each other? Sherif was fascinated by what psychologists call in-groups and out-groups. An in-group is a group people belong to and feel loyal toward. An out-group is everyone else. Sherif believed that group conflict was not rooted primarily in personality, race, or culture, but in competition over resources and status. He wanted to see if hostility could be created from nothing at all. To test this, he designed a series of experiments. In 1949, Sherif ran an early version of the study with 24 boys at a camp called Middle Grove. The boys were carefully selected to share similar backgrounds so that personality would be the main variable. The experiment unfolded in stages. First, the boys formed friendships. Then they were split into groups and isolated from each other. Finally, competition was introduced. Hostility appeared quickly. Encouraged by these results, Sherif attempted a more controlled experiment in 1953. But this study failed early. The boys began questioning the strange behavior of the adults and even turned against the researchers themselves. Sherif downplayed this failure publicly, but it forced him to rethink his approach. That rethink led directly to the Robbers Cave experiment. The 1954 study required 22 boys who had never met each other. This was harder than it sounds. Sherif and his team selected Oklahoma City as their recruitment ground. Only one boy per school was allowed to ensure no prior relationships. Researchers visited schools, observed children playing, and quietly reviewed school records. From around 200 candidates, the pool was narrowed to about 50. Parents were contacted and told their sons would attend a 3-week camp studying teamwork and sportsmanship. Parents were told visits were not allowed. The cost was $25. Eventually, 22 boys were selected. The experiment was ready. The Robbers Cave study was carefully divided into 3 stages. Stage 1 was group formation. Stage 2 was conflict and competition. Stage 3 was integration and reconciliation. Hidden microphones recorded conversations. Observers took notes for 12 hours a day. The boys had no idea. On June 19, 1954, the first group arrived. The second group followed a day later. They were housed separately in cabins near Moccasin Creek. Each group had counselors who lived with them full-time and senior staff who observed quietly. The counselors were instructed not to interfere. Almost immediately, bonds began forming. On the bus ride, the boys talked about their families and neighborhoods. At camp, they played games, explored the woods, swam in the creek, and created group symbols. The Eagles and the Rattlers made flags, chose slogans, and marked their territory with hideouts and signs. Language shifted quickly. Objects became ours. Decisions became what we think. A shared identity was born. Toward the end of the first week, the groups were finally allowed to discover each other's existence. Excitement surged. Curiosity turned into challenge. At the same time, 2 boys from the Eagles were sent home due to homesickness, unintentionally increasing tension by making the groups uneven. Both groups demanded a competition. Stage 2 began. The boys were told there would be a tournament: baseball, tug of war, football, scavenger hunts, and skill tests. Points would accumulate. The winning group would receive a trophy, medals, and knives. Almost instantly, hostility flared. Name-calling began. Territories were claimed. Flags were planted and defended. The Rattlers showed strong aggression from the start. The Eagles grew more competitive over time. Good sportsmanship vanished. After one tug-of-war loss, the Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag. The Rattlers retaliated by destroying the Eagles' flag. Cabins were raided at night. Beds were overturned. Belongings were stolen. Comic books disappeared. Clothing was taken. What began as a game became personal. By the final day, the tournament came down to a single event: a treasure hunt. The Eagles won by less than 2 minutes. Celebration on one side, silent fury on the other. That night, the Rattlers raided again, stealing the prizes. A fight nearly broke out before staff intervened. The boys wanted nothing to do with each other. Stage 3 began. Sherif initially believed simply bringing the groups together would ease tension. He was wrong. Shared meals led to insults and food fights. Movie nights ended in arguments. Proximity alone only made things worse. So Sherif tried something different. He created superordinate goals, problems that could only be solved together. First, the water supply mysteriously failed. Both groups were told vandals were responsible. 25 people were needed to fix it. The boys worked together. Something shifted. Later, the boys were told the camp could not afford a movie they wanted to watch. After heated negotiation, both groups agreed to contribute money. They began talking again, playing together, laughing. Finally, the truck broke down during a campout. The boys had to pull it free together. When it worked, they celebrated as one group. By the end of the camp, the boys chose to ride home on the same bus. Prize money was shared. Group boundaries blurred. Sherif concluded that group hostility can be created easily through competition, even among nearly identical people. He showed that hierarchies form naturally within groups, that loyalty intensifies under threat, and that conflict does not fade simply through contact. But he also demonstrated that cooperation toward shared goals can reduce hostility. This became the foundation of realistic conflict theory. The experiment has faced serious criticism. The boys could not give informed consent. Parents were not told the full truth. Violence occurred without intervention. The staff manipulated outcomes. They encouraged conflict. They did not behave like normal counselors. There was no true control group. Later research, including Gina Perry's book, The Lost Boys, revealed far more manipulation than Sherif admitted. Interestingly, the failed 1953 experiment showed the opposite of Sherif's theory. The boys united against the researchers instead of each other. The Robbers Cave experiment remains one of psychology's most powerful and unsettling studies. It shows how easily we divide, how quickly identity becomes weaponized, and how fragile peace really is. But it also offers hope, because if conflict can be created, it can also be undone. The question is whether we choose competition or cooperation,